your top stories. Eduloan CEO Totsie Memela-Khambule says even though higher education fees increase annually, the increase can never be compared to the cost of illiteracy. Now, she has warned that overlooking education would see South Africa lose its competitive edge in both academic and many other key social spheres of life. Khambule says the other BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, are emphasizing on education as part of their measure of development. Memela-Khambule now joins us in the studio. Welcome to AM News, Totsie.
Thank you.
Now, why is education so important? My grandmother used to say, education is very important. But why is it so important for South Africa's economic and social development?
My belief is that without us ensuring that we educate our youth, but not only our youth, but also educate ourselves as we grow in our own careers, there's no way we can, one, create a better life for our children. We can't create economic growth for our own country, but also we cannot be able to improve competitiveness as a nation.
Now, the cost of education in South Africa is very expensive, and I'll quote some figures here. Apparently, the cost of tertiary education is 75,000 rand per annum. But how can a country like ours, with high levels of unemployment, afford the cost of getting a proper education?
I think we can't make excuses by saying the cost of education is high, therefore we should not get educated, because the cost of illiteracy is even much, much more. I think our government has done a great job in terms of ensuring that there's relatively sufficient funding. It may not be enough, but there's relatively sufficient funding in terms of ensuring that those that are, whose parents earn below 130,000 rands per annum can have access to NSFAS funds. And there's institutions like us as Eduloan that are able to provide support to those people that are in the middle income. Because in terms of what we provide is access to those people that are not poor enough to get access to NSFAS, but also not rich enough to get access to banking loans. And that's the middle income group that we provide support to. The support that we provide is what you may call pay as you go, which therefore means that as the child is studying or as the parent is improving their own skills, they pay whilst they are studying, which therefore means that you don't get over-indebted at the end of your program.
Now, government says that education, of course, is one of their top 5 priorities, right? But are they doing enough in order to address the situation in the country?
I think the challenge is not short of funds that we have as South Africans. There are countries that are doing better than we are, that are much, much poorer than us. When you look at what the former Minister of Finance actually allocated in terms of budget for the next 3 years, it's almost 250 billion rand, both for lower education up to tertiary. So we're not short of money. The challenge is, are we using the money efficiently? Are we using the money to the right things? And the other issue is our children understanding that once they go to school and do what they're supposed to do and get the job done. I mean, it's challenging that we have about 60% of students that go to tertiary actually completing and not dropping out. This is waste of funds, which is funds that parents actually pay, but also funds which is taxpayers' money, which is your money and mine. So we therefore need to make sure that once our kids get to school, they focus, as my mother used to say, because that becomes important. I'm not saying as a young person, you also you should not have fun as you grow, but you never should forget about why you are at school.
Now, what is the role of private sector and society in supporting quality and affordable education for all, or is there such a thing?
I think there is. I believe, we in Eduloan believe that even for the private sector, which is companies, it's their responsibility to make sure that their employees can access education, because education is not different from health, because we do pay medical aid for employees. It's not different from pension. Why should we worry about a person when they go on pension and we don't worry about them whilst they are still alive and still being productive, so that we can ensure that they can become even more productive both in the workplace, but also in terms of making their children become even more productive.
Now, we mentioned the cost of education, which is very high, which you said we should never really look at it in that perspective. But quality education, some say or suggest that it's made deliberately expensive. And that is so that the black majority don't get educated. What do you say to that notion?
I don't think it's a fair notion, because at the end of the day, the cost of living has gone up. It doesn't matter what it is. Whether you're talking education, you're talking housing. So it's more in relation to the cost of everything else. But the cost of ignorance is even more, because once you don't have access to education, it therefore means that even your life and the life of your children and the life of generations in your family will never improve.
What about free education? There was the notion that free education should be made available to everybody so that we can have a prosperous society. What do you make of that?
I think there is an argument by the AU that even in terms of the millennial goals, that primary education should be free. I don't see how we as South Africans, when you look at all the other things that we need to invest on, that it can be possible for us to actually provide free education. Because even just the cost of managing an institution like a university, it is a costly expense. I mean, the other day I had one of the universities talking about the fact that the cost of managing all the things that they need to manage is about 3 billion rands. How then do you enable people to come to university and have access to that education for free? I can't see it possible. I know that it's the commitment of government, but I can't see it possible.
Now, you mentioned that you do support the middle income grouping, but what do you do if a student come to you and their parents can't even manage to have that? So they just above the level of the NAFSAS, we're at about 130. Do you assist them as well as Eduloan? We
do. For example, our smallest loans are loans that are our smallest loan currently is 500 rands, which therefore means that you may find that in some instances, people may require support in terms of being able to register. But if you cannot pay, we would be irresponsible as an institution if we give you money yet you cannot be able to pay back. In terms of the National Credit Act, we would actually be doing reckless lending. We cannot assist in that instances. But I believe there's a lot of institutions for students that are able to go to programs that where there's scarce skills in the country that provide bursaries. That's a whole range of institutions, some of whom we manage their funds, where you can be able to get support. But also universities, in many instances, have their own funding where they provide support for students that are academically astute. But the key is to make sure that once you get a bursary, you focus on what you're there for so that you can get the job done and go and be productive.
And then finally, Totsie, your final words to students and parents out there in 30 seconds.
To students is, make sure that when you are at university, be it at university or at any other level, is to focus on making sure that you get the job done. I think to parents is to look around, to shop around, so that you don't pay more than what you should.
Totsie, thank you so much for joining us here in studio on AM.
Thank you very much.
That was the Eduloan CEO, Totsie Memela, talking to us about educating the next generation of taxpayers to ensure that South Africa remains competitive.